Our top focus this hour, the New Zealand police has formally introduced the hijab into their official uniform to encourage more Muslim women to join the police forces. Zeena Ali is the first officer in the police force's history to wear the police-issued hijab. The 30-year-old new recruit graduated last week and had provided the feedback on uniform to the New Zealand police forces. Zeena Ali had also recommended tweaks to the Massey Design School for the police uniform in the island nation. Now that the recruitment process has been completed, Zeena Ali got an official police-branded hijab to wear on her graduation ceremony. In March 2019, a white supremacist had gunned down 50 people at two mosques in the city of Christchurch in New Zealand. The brutal attack shook the island nation and divided opinions across the world. But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made sure that her country's spirit of diversity and secular values does not get hampered by the terror attack. The Prime Minister, along with several women across the country, donned headscarves in solidarity with the victims of the attack. The hijab-like headgear shunned the Islamophobic ideology and anti-immigrant sentiment which is currently prevalent around the world. There were multiple social media-led movements encouraging New Zealanders to wear hijab-like scarves as a show of support. It's been less than 2 years and the country is indeed living up to these values, and the New Zealand police is now winning praises for once again upholding diversity within its ranks. But this is not the first time. In fact, back in 2008, the police force had introduced the turban into its uniform as well. Constable Jagmohan Malhi became the first officer to wear a turban on duty. At this highly polarized time, when countries like France, Spain, Germany and others are banning headgears in public over national security concerns, New Zealand has once again chosen to allow all its citizens to fully embrace their respective religious identities. For more, Max Walden, a journalist at ABC News, joins us live from Melbourne. Thanks so much, Max, for joining us. Now, the New Zealand Police Force has introduced a hijab into their official uniform to encourage more Muslim women to join. So how is this being perceived, and will we see more law enforcement agencies across the world follow?
Yeah, look, I think generally, as far as I can tell, the reception's certainly quite positive in New Zealand itself. You know, in some ways, I suppose, in a multicultural society like New Zealand or indeed here in Australia, it's almost surprising that perhaps this part of the uniform wasn't implemented earlier, as you mentioned, with Constable Jagmohan Malhi in 2008. New Zealand's police introduced a turban to allow Sikh men to serve in the police. So certainly, I think for many New Zealanders, this will be a welcome introduction, and also I think it's going to reflect well for New Zealand in its neighbourhood, certainly with countries like Indonesia and Malaysia that have large Muslim populations. Of course, this, you know, it's good for New Zealand's soft power in terms of how it's viewed in its region.
Right. Now, Max, this move is significant on multiple levels. It comes in the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter protests, where police brutality against minority community has come under global scrutiny. And not to forget the anti-Islam sentiment spreading across some European nations right now in light of the radical Islamist attack that took place recently. So this makes New Zealand's decision even more significant. What are your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of Black Lives Matter and the police, of course, you know, police brutality is an issue across the world, from the United States to India and indeed Australia and New Zealand. There's always issues with policing, and I think policy experts have long told us that if you have more women in the police service, people who are trained to deal with issues for particular populations. Certainly, you know, Muslims commit crimes in New Zealand just as non-Muslims commit crimes. And so to have more inclusion of Muslim police officers who can deal with that in a more culturally sensitive way, and certainly women, I think the more, you know, police services, at least in Australia and New Zealand, have long been trying to recruit more women to deal with issues like domestic violence. So I think certainly this will be welcomed by you know, plenty of inclusion advocates, but also people that work on issues that say domestic violence. In terms of, I was just going to say, in terms of just in terms of situating it within, I guess, the broader debates around secularism in the Western world, as it were, I think countries, particularly Anglophone countries like New Zealand, Australia, Britain, the United States, tend to have a more strong ideology of multiculturalism, so mainstreaming of allowing people, whether they're from India or a Muslim background or from Southeast Asia, to kind of enjoy their language and culture and religion. And that doesn't necessarily detract from being an Australian or a New Zealander. Whereas I suppose France and other European countries have quite a distinct, different view of what it means to be a French citizen, where perhaps sometimes they view that you need to lose some of your perhaps Muslim identity or religious or cultural identity in order to become properly French. So I think that's probably to some extent playing out. But I think, yeah, definitely, as you say, the timing of the introduction of this hijab for the New Zealand police, will certainly put it in stark contrast to how France is being viewed in, I guess, a lot of Muslim majority parts of the world.
Right, Max, that brings me to my final question. In your opinion, will we see more women, especially from minority communities globally, join the police forces after the significant move from New Zealand?
Well, look, you never know. New Zealand's a small country, but I think, as we've seen with Jacinda Ardern, small countries and led by very competent, strong leaders like her can kind of have an influence perhaps above their size. So I do think, a lot of people will welcome this as a positive development. And certainly, I think many policy experts who look at issues, particularly around domestic violence, but just, having a police force that's more representative of the population in general, I think most people can agree that's a positive thing. Certainly in the US at the moment, there's debates around defunding the police or even abolishing the police. I think this kind of move certainly is nowhere near as, it's moving the opposite direction, actually. It's making the police force more representative of a diverse country like New Zealand. And I think a lot of people would hope that this would, have an influence in other countries, perhaps like Australia. Sometimes we are a little bit behind New Zealand in terms of these kinds of reforms. And I think, I would say that I do think it probably will see more women, be pushed into the police and other other government institutions across the planet.
Right. All right, Max, thank you so much for all your insights, and thank you for joining us on this broadcast.